In this series, we're focusing on sharing perspectives and stories of those who have undergone genetic testing in the hopes of helping others who are struggling with this important decision. Today, we are joined by my friend Karen. I recently chatted with her during quarantine and we immediately connected. So I've asked her to come on today and share her story. Karen, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Karen, I know that your family story has been shared in the media quite a bit, but would you mind sharing that story with us, how you found out that your family was at risk for early onset familial Alzheimer's disease, and then maybe when you actually yourself realized that you might be at risk for the disease?
Sure. The early onset Alzheimer's for our family, at least for my parents, my brother and I, has been always something we knew. So growing up, I knew that my paternal grandmother had died of Alzheimer's. We knew that it, quote unquote, ran in the family. I don't think we necessarily knew about genetic statuses and all of that, but it was always something that was in the back of our heads. And in our family, many of our extended relatives have passed away before they were 60. So we have that 50-year-old mark as a timeline in our head. So we watched Dad as he approached that age limit, and 50 came and went. So we all thought, oh, all right, it's skipped us then, so that's fine. But then a few years later, we found out about and said, hey, you should see if you could help. They were studying people with the gene mutation and without, so maybe you could be of help. So my dad just joined it to be part of the observational study. And as part of that, he got his genetic test just to check off that box, to really be official about it. And I think he was 62 at the time. And to all of our surprise, we found out that he did indeed have that gene mutation. So then suddenly, my brother and I, after 10 years of thinking, oh, this has just passed us by, it's no problem. Well, because my dad had it, we both had a 50-50 chance of getting it. That was, I think, around 2010, 2011. It was something we had in our minds, but then cleared it from our minds for a little while. We had to get back into that. Okay, what does this mean now? So my brother and I then joined the same study. And I think it was early 2012, I got my genetic status, which was negative. So I don't have the gene mutation.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that's a lot to digest. So I guess I want to clarify for everybody just what the DIAN study is. So that's out of Washington University, and it's called the Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network. And they run clinical trials for people who are at risk or have the mutation that causes early onset Alzheimer's disease. And then also, just to address your father, who's an escapee, well, is what we call it in the science field, right? So he has the mutation, but he hasn't developed any symptoms of the disease. And there's actually been a few reported cases. They're very rare, but they happen, where you can test positive for the mutation. But like one woman in Colombia who recently came out, I don't know if you saw that publication, but she didn't get the disease until she was very late age, 70s or 80s. I think her normal age of onset was in the 40s. They looked at her brain and there were plaques, but there were no tangles. And so escapees have become to be very important in our understanding of what kind of resilience or preventative genetics come into play in helping delay the disease. You've got a famous dad there.
I know. And it's simultaneously exciting. We're so obviously thankful that he hasn't developed any symptoms yet, and he's involved in a whole bunch of other studies, like you said, about protective genes, lifestyles, all that kind of stuff, to figure out, is there a reason he escaped? But then it also adds to my brother and I's confusion about how to feel about this. Like, if you have a genetic, if you're positive, have the sort of dodgy gene, as our friends in England call it, what does that mean for us then? Because typically you use your parents' age of onset to determine how your disease is going to progress. And so our dads just escaped out there. So does that mean we then too would escape it? So it's all very interesting, and we're grateful, and we're happy to be at least a part of studies to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. It is really important that he's contributing, and just his existence brings a lot of people hope, even if they do test positive for the mutation. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I know that you told us your mutation status, which is negative, which I'm just so ecstatic and happy for you to hear that. But of course, when you found out that your dad had the mutation and you knew that you had a 50-50% chance, I think a lot of people may have a different thought process of what brings them to genetic testing. And I'm just curious, can you maybe walk us through what your thought process was for deciding to get tested? Because I think a lot of people who know that they have a 50% chance, I often hear the question, like, how do I know I'm ready to know my mutation status?
Sure. First, let me say that I'm a librarian, so I'm all about information. For me, it was pretty clear that either way, I needed to have that information in order to gather my thoughts, prepare myself, figure out what I was going to do. That information was really important. I will say that it's not the right decision for everybody. For me, it turned out well because now I have that weight lifted that you can never go back to not knowing. For a lot of people, even just having that hope there is pretty significant. So I think people have to do some deep introspection. I will also say that the clinic we did our genetic testing through had an amazing genetic counselor. And I cannot stress enough how much I thought I was prepared and knew I wanted to do this, knew I wanted to get my status. And I sat with her for an hour and she asked me questions I had not thought of. One of which was, and what will you do if you're negative? And I immediately thought, won't I be happy? Won't that be great news? And so even preparing for that news, understanding like, sure, you'll be happy, but there are a lot of things to think about. You still have family at risk. What does that mean for you participating in all of these things? So for me, it was a pretty strong knowledge that I deal better when I have information. I once took a personality test and the very first sentence in it was, Karen is uncomfortable with uncertainty. And that is me to a T. Like, I don't like not knowing. I want that information. But then to follow that up with a really good genetic counselor who will ask you questions you haven't asked yourself and really give yourself that time to go through that process and not rush it, for me was really important. I have some cousins who had an opposite experience with genetic counselors. So I just really encourage people to A, go through that process, and B, if you're still feeling a little uncomfortable after that, find another one and really give that gift to yourself.
That's such great advice. A good genetic counselor can make that process so much easier to go through. It's already hard, but you don't want to have that added difficulty on top. So you talked a little bit about the process. I'm just curious for those who maybe now they're thinking, I think I'm ready to do that. Can you walk us through the process?
Sure. And let me preface this by saying we had a really good experience. We had a really great group of people. I'm so happy we had the people we had to help us through this process. We reached out to the clinic and said, okay, we're ready to, I shouldn't say we, me, my brother got his stats a little bit later, but I said, I'm ready to get this, let's schedule it. So you go in, I had a meeting with neurologist who specializes in Alzheimer's and the genetic counselor. And I think there might have been a coordinator there to help schedule things. So you sit down and you talk about it and you have a preliminary, are you ready to get this information? Here are some implications of knowing this or not. They talked about insurance, long-term care insurance in particular, things that can be affected by knowing your status. We talked a lot about GINA, being protected from being discriminated against for a genetic status and that kind of stuff. So it was a pretty brief conversation, said, yes, I want to move forward. And at that point is when they scheduled the genetic counselor. And that was, I think, about a week later. So nothing happened real rapid fire, which I appreciate. It slows that down because there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in it. Your adrenaline's running. You're like, let's just do this. And so I appreciated that they purposely stretched it out a little bit. So then I met with the genetic counselor. We talked for a good hour. I think she then also followed up with me by phone afterwards just to make sure nothing else had come up. Then we scheduled the blood test. I went and did that. And I think it was a couple of weeks, maybe 2, in between doing the blood test and then getting the results. I got called into the office to sit down with the neurologist to get my results, which I know some of my cousins got a phone call, which is just real scary because it was nerve-wracking enough to get the phone call to schedule the appointment to go in to get your results, let alone hear your results. So just remember that you may have made the decision to find out your genetic status, but there's still things that will catch you. And for me, it was that phone call of, okay, come in. And then immediately my mind goes to, okay, he's not telling me over the phone. If I'm going in, does that mean I have it? So all this stuff going on in your head. but then they sat down and delivered the results there at the table, and they were really good about just giving us space to digest it. So I think that for me was something surprising. I thought, oh, once I make the decision, this will be it until I get the result, and then I can deal with it then. There were some things during the process that I was like, oh, I'm nervous about this, just to recognize that there's going to be a lot of ups and downs in that process.
Yeah, you're probably reading into your genetic counselors and neurologists' behaviors.
Questions like, what was that tone? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but a good genetic counselor won't disclose their emotions until you're really, they shouldn't at all. They should be able to read the envelope. And so you shouldn't be able to read anything into the way that they're acting. Yeah. Have led us up to the point where they brought you into the room and they're opening up the envelope and telling you, and you shared with us when they opened that envelope, they said you're negative for the mutation. So what is it like to know your status? What was it like finding that out immediately? And then has that kind of changed over time for you?
Oh, for sure. I would say as you're sitting at the table, you hear it. I was there with a really close friend of mine and my mother. My mom immediately obviously started crying, tears of joy. And so it was emotional being in there. And of course, you're relieved. I'm single. I don't have any kids. The thought of, okay, how am I going to plan for caretakers and that kind of thing? If I was positive, all of that sort of lifts. So there was a little while of feeling pretty happy. I got to call my dad and tell him I was live, and he was overjoyed, obviously. But then it pretty quickly got reined back in. My brother was at risk who didn't know his genetic status. He has a daughter who potentially could be in line for this. I still had an extended family who was at risk, cousins who were finding out their genetic status. And through this study, we've gotten to know more and more people who are affected by this. So then it becomes, okay, I have been freed from this, but now other work begins. I use the analogy of going from offense to defense, and I don't really know a lot about sports, so I don't know if that's the right analogy, but rather than working to protect myself, it suddenly shifted to now, how can I help other people? How can I support my brother? How can I support my dad and all of his continued research that's happening? So it just shifted my mind. It started with being real happy about it. And I have to say that's when that genetic counselor asking me, how will you feel if you're negative, really came into play. I was like, oh, I'm so glad we went through a thought exercise about this. Otherwise, I would have been really taken aback by suddenly feeling guilty for not having it, a little bit of survivor's guilt, I guess. So there were a lot of emotions that sort of came up out of that I was so glad I had talked to her about. Obviously, I'm happy that I don't have this gene mutation, but I think it's also now turned into why have I been spared from this when all these people I love and know haven't been. So there's a lot of that going on. And how do I contribute productively to this now? Like, I can't be in the drug trials because I know my status and it's negative. So that's not going to happen. So continuing to work in the observational study, just so they can study me and my dad, they can study me compared to other family members, which I think is really powerful and important. So trying to figure out now, okay, if I don't have to worry about this, how can I still contribute this research?
And I don't think that you're alone in that feeling, first of all, of survivor's guilt, which is a real thing.
Yeah.
And then also just trying to figure out where you fit now, having found out that you're not at risk, the thing that you've been worrying about your entire life, or maybe not for your entire life because you did have that lifted when your dad didn't get sick, but
yeah,
it was around in your family. And now all of a sudden you have to figure out how you fit into things. And I think you're still very much a part of this community. People who test negative do have an important role to play because they're often the ones who become the caregivers. They're the ones who have the stamina to keep up the fight when others can't. And for anybody who does test positive for the mutation, they may be hesitant for good reason to talk about their story, fear of genetic discrimination, whereas people who are negative can bring a voice to this disease and not have to face those repercussions. I think, you bring up really important points. Having gone through this process, let's say there's somebody listening and they're on the fence about finding out their genetic status. Is there any kind of final comment that you would just like to say to them right now?
The biggest thing I would say is that this is not a decision someone else can make for you. And you can hear a really inspiring story about someone who found out or didn't find out. And that may be a great story, but it's that person's story. So my only piece of advice would to be to really listen to yourself and talk to your family about it and make a collective decision and do what you feel is right for you, and to not let someone tell you that decision is wrong. There's lots of reasons not to find out. My story would be really different if I found out I was positive. I may not be optimistic and being like, oh, I'm so glad I had this information. Maybe I would be saying, I wish I didn't have this information. So that for me is the biggest thing, just knowing that everyone's story is different and everyone has a different thing that's right for them. So really believe in that and trust in that. Get as much information as you can, listen to a bunch of different stories, and really make that decision for yourself.
That's such great advice. Do you have any recommendations for navigating the world now that you're negative? Does it change the family dynamics a bit?
I think it changes to some extent. Our family's always been really open about talking about it, so it's not like we don't talk about it anymore. I do think, as someone who's negative, I try to make more space for people who either know their genetic status and it's positive or don't know yet, not just be telling my story all the time, but leave space for them to tell their story, and really understanding if I ask my brother a question about it and he's not in the mood to talk about it, I give him space not to do that. Or other family members. We have cousins who we're close to who are going through similar things. And I think it's just one of those things to remember in the back of your head. They have a lot of emotions going on. They're going to have a lot of emotions going on talking to you, knowing in the back of their head they're going to be experiencing something that you don't have to experience now. So I think just understanding that there's a lot of stuff happening on their end that you, A, don't have any control over, and B, all you can do is be there for them. And so I think it changes the conversation in that understanding you're free of this, but they're very much in it, and understanding that maybe they think, oh, this person doesn't want to hear me complain about this because they don't have to worry about it anymore. But I think as someone who's negative, just making sure that those family members know you're there and available if they want to have dialogue with you. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do, is make sure it's not just, okay, bye, see ya, I don't have to worry about this anymore, but also not pushing them into conversations that maybe they're not ready to have. So I think the biggest thing is just being available for whatever level of conversation they want to have.
Yeah, I think being there is just so powerful. That's really great advice. And I think a great way to end our conversation today, just being there for those who are in need. And especially if you know anybody who's going through genetic testing, know that you have a whole community behind you, standing behind you, who are there for you, who would like to be there for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out and ask for any help that you might need, because many of us have already been through it and we're on the other side, and we want to help you in any way we can. So Karen, thank you so much again for joining us today. It was such a pleasure talking with you, and I hope that we get to see each other in person soon.
I do too. Thanks, Lindsay. This was really great. And thank you so much for everything you're doing with Youngtimers. I think it's a really great thing you're doing. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.